He cried every single night, and nobody knew he was dying. Jason was 1 year old, and he was in pain. Not the kind of pain you can see in an X-ray or catch with a test. The kind that lives in a baby's body, silent and slow, twisting his spine a little more each day, while the people around him, his father, his nanny, his doctors, saw nothing. He lived in a $15 million mansion in San Francisco, floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furniture, everything perfect. Except the baby. His father, Leonard, couldn't look at him. Grief over his dead wife had swallowed him whole, and every time he saw Jason's face, he saw her, so he stopped looking. The nanny, Mrs. Brennan, had 30 years of experience and 0 patience. To her, Jason's crying was just noise, something to manage, something to ignore. The pediatrician had been called, once, maybe twice, but no one followed up. And Jason, he kept crying, kept hurting, kept waiting for someone to notice. Then Tracy walked in. She wasn't supposed to see anything. She was just there to clean, stay quiet, stay invisible. She had a sick son at home and bills she couldn't pay. She needed this job more than she needed to be right. But one afternoon, when no one was watching, she picked Jason up, and she felt it. Something wrong, something terrible. Then she saw the mark on his leg, and everything made sense. But knowing the truth and speaking it, those are two very different things. Especially when the people who don't want to hear it have all the power, and you have nothing but your voice. Before we begin, like this video, hit subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because sometimes the people who see the truth aren't the ones with the most power, they're the ones who care enough to look. Tracy's first morning started the way most of her mornings did, early, tired, and worried about money. She pulled into the driveway just after 7. The house looked even bigger in the daylight. All that glass, all that space. She sat in her car for a moment, staring up at it, trying to calm the nerves in her stomach. You need this job. Don't mess it up. Inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something to break. She started in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already spotless. Then, the living room, the windows. Moving carefully, trying not to make too much noise. That's when she heard it. Crying, soft at first, coming from somewhere upstairs. Tracy paused, her hand still on the window she'd been cleaning. She listened. The crying didn't stop. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was just sad. The kind of sad that makes your chest hurt. She kept working, telling herself it wasn't her business. Babies cry. That's normal. But 20 minutes passed, then 30, and the crying didn't stop. Tracy moved closer to the staircase, her heart beating a little faster. She could hear Mrs. Brennan upstairs now, moving around, opening drawers, her voice sharp through the walls. Jason, enough. You're fine. The baby's crying got louder. Desperate. I said enough. Tracy's hands tightened around the cleaning cloth. A few minutes later, Mrs. Brennan came downstairs carrying Jason. The baby's face was red and puffy from crying. His little body was stiff, tilted to one side in a way that didn't look right. The nanny set him down in a playpen near the window and walked away without a word. Jason whimpered, tried to move, winced. Tracy watched from across the room, her chest tight. Something's wrong with him. That evening, Leonard came home. He walked through the front door like a ghost, jacket slung over one shoulder, eyes distant. He didn't say hello, didn't ask about his son. He just headed straight for his office. Mr. Turner, Mrs. Brennan called after him. Jason's been fussy again today. Should I? Handle it, Leonard said without turning around. That's your job. The office door closed. Tracy stood frozen in the hallway, a vacuum in her hand, watching the man disappear. She looked over at the playpen. Jason sat there, quiet now. Not because he felt better, because he'd given up. And something inside Tracy shifted. She thought about Malik, about all the times she'd stayed up with him when he was sick, refusing to sleep until she knew he was okay. But this wasn't her child. This wasn't her house. And if she stepped out of line, the crying started again. Louder this time. Mrs. Brennan sighed from the kitchen, pulled out her earbuds, and started walking toward the playpen. Tracy watched her pick Jason up, not gently, not carefully, just efficiently, like he was laundry that needed folding. You're going to bed early tonight, the nanny muttered. I've had enough of this. She carried him upstairs. The crying continued, muffled now, behind a closed door. Tracy stood at the bottom of the stairs, her heart pounding in her ears. She shouldn't follow. She shouldn't care. She shouldn't risk everything for a baby that wasn't hers. But her feet were already moving. One step, then another. And by the time she reached the top of the stairs, she could hear Mrs. Brennan's voice coming from the nursery, cold and clipped. "Stay in the crib. I don't want to hear another sound." The door opened. Mrs. Brennan stepped out, and she saw Tracy standing there in the hallway. The two women stared at each other in the hallway. Mrs. Brennan's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing up here?" Tracy's mouth went dry. I heard crying. I thought maybe—" "You thought what?" The nanny's voice was ice. "That you'd interfere? Check on a child that isn't your concern? I just wanted to make sure he was okay." Mrs. Brennan stepped closer, her face tight with something that looked like anger, but felt more like fear. "Let me be very clear with you, Tracy. I have been caring for children since before you were born. I know what I'm doing. Jason is fine. He's a fussy baby. Some children are just like that, but he seems like he's in pain. You're the cleaning woman." Each word came out sharp, deliberate. "You clean floors. You don't diagnose children. Do you understand me?" Tracy nodded, her heart pounding. "Good." Mrs. Brennan brushed past her toward the stairs. "I suggest you remember your place. Mr. Turner doesn't tolerate overstepping, and neither do I." Tracy stood alone in the hallway, her hands shaking. Behind the nursery door, Jason had gone quiet. Not peaceful quiet, exhausted quiet. She wanted to go in, wanted to check on him, but her feet wouldn't move. "You need this job. You can't afford to lose it." The next morning, Tracy arrived early again, hoping to avoid Mrs. Brennan, but the house felt different somehow, heavier. As she cleaned the living room, she noticed things she hadn't seen before. Framed photos on the mantel, a beautiful woman with dark hair and a bright smile, holding a newborn baby. Leonard standing beside her, his arm around her waist, actually smiling. The woman was in every photo, some alone, some with Leonard, some just her hand resting on her pregnant belly. Maria, Jason's mother. Tracy picked up one of the frames to dust beneath it. The photo showed Maria in the nursery, painting the walls, laughing at the camera. She did all of it herself. Tracy jumped, nearly dropping the frame. Leonard stood in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. "I'm sorry, Mr. Turner. I was just—" "She designed the whole nursery," he continued, his voice distant. "Picked out every piece of furniture, every toy, even the crib bumpers." His jaw tightened. It was the last thing she finished before the accident. Tracy carefully set the frame back down. "I'm very sorry for your loss." Leonard didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at the photo, his face empty. Then he turned and walked away. Tracy watched him go, her chest aching. This wasn't just a rich man ignoring his child. This was a man so broken by grief that he couldn't bear to see his own son, couldn't bear to enter the nursery his wife had made, couldn't bear to be a father because being a father meant remembering he was also a widower. And somewhere in the middle of all that pain, a baby was suffering. That afternoon, Tracy was cleaning near the playpen when Jason started crying again. She glanced toward the kitchen. Mrs. Brennan was on the phone, her back turned. Tracy knelt down beside the playpen. "Hey, little one," she whispered. Jason looked at her, his eyes red and swollen. He didn't reach for her, didn't smile, just watched her with that same heartbreaking resignation. Tracy's throat tightened. She reached through the bars and gently touched his hand. Jason flinched. Not from fear, from pain. And that's when Tracy saw it clearly for the first time. The way his shoulder sat higher on one side, the way his back curved when he tried to sit up, the way moving at all seemed to hurt. "What are you doing?" Tracy spun around. Mrs. Brennan stood behind her, her face dark with anger. "I told you not to touch him." "I wasn't. Get your things. You're done for the day." Tracy stood slowly, her heart racing. "Mrs. Brennan, please. I think something's really wrong with—" "Out. Now." Tracy grabbed her supplies and headed for the door, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold on to anything. But as she reached her car, she looked back at the house, at the windows, the perfection, the wealth, and somewhere inside, a baby crying that no one wanted to hear. Tracy sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel. She thought about Malik waiting for her at home, about her mama, about the bills on her kitchen counter, about everything she'd lose if she pushed this. Then she thought about Jason's eyes, and she knew she was already in too deep to walk away. Day 3. Tracy almost didn't come back, but she needed the money, so she showed up. Mrs. Brennan met her at the door. Main floor only today. Stay downstairs. Yes, ma'am. The nanny went upstairs with Jason, and within minutes, the crying started. Tracy scrubbed the kitchen counters, trying to ignore it, but the sound wouldn't stop. 20 minutes, 30, 45. She could hear Mrs. Brennan moving around upstairs, completely unfazed. Jason, enough. You're fine. But he wasn't fine. Tracy gripped the sponge tighter, her chest burning. Around noon, Mrs. Brennan grabbed her purse. I'm going out for lunch. Don't go upstairs. The door closed. Tracy stood alone in the quiet house, her heart pounding. She knew she shouldn't, but she couldn't stop herself. She climbed the stairs, pushed open the nursery door, and stepped inside. Jason lay in his crib, awake, staring at nothing. His face was red and swollen, his body curved to the side in a way that made her stomach twist. Tracy knelt beside him. Hey, baby. He looked at her with those tired, heartbroken eyes. She pulled out her phone and searched. Baby won't sit straight. Infant spinal problems. The results made her hands shake. If caught early, treatable. If left untreated, permanent damage. She heard the front door open downstairs. Tracy jumped up, slipped out of the nursery, and rushed back to the kitchen just as Mrs. Brennan walked in. The nanny's eyes narrowed. Where were you? Finishing the living room, Tracy said, forcing her voice steady. Mrs. Brennan didn't look convinced. That evening, Leonard came home. Tracy was cleaning the entryway when he walked past her, phone pressed to his ear. She took a breath. Mr. Turner? He stopped, irritation flashing across his face. What? It's about Jason. I think he needs to see a doctor. His back doesn't look right. Mrs. Brennan handles Jason's care. Leonard cut her off, his voice cold. She's been doing this for 30 years. If something was wrong, she'd know. But what if she's missing something? Tracy. He stepped closer, his jaw tight. You're not paid to diagnose my son. You're paid to clean. Do your job, or I'll find someone who will. He walked away. Tracy stood there, her throat burning, tears stinging her eyes. She was nobody, just the help. And he was a man with all the power in the world. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. On the screen, a number for Child Protective Services. Her finger hovered over it. If she called, she could lose everything. But if she didn't, she thought about Jason's face. That curve in his spine, permanent damage if left untreated. Tomorrow, Mrs. Brennan had a doctor's appointment. She'd be gone for hours. Tomorrow, Tracy would be alone with Jason. And maybe that was her one chance. Even if it cost her everything. Her phone buzzed. A text from Malik's school. Reminder. Medication, refill needed by Friday. Tracy closed her eyes. She couldn't afford to lose this job. But she couldn't afford to stay silent either. Tomorrow, she'd have to choose. Friday morning, Mrs. Brennan was waiting by the door when Tracy arrived. I have an appointment. I'll be back in 2 hours, maybe 3. Tracy's pulse quickened. Should I? Jason's in his playpen. Keep him there. Don't pick him up. Don't feed him. Just leave him alone and do your work. The nanny's eyes were sharp. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am. The door closed. Silence. Tracy stood in the entryway, her heart pounding in her ears. She was alone. With Jason. For the first time all week, she could actually help him, actually see what was wrong. But Mrs. Brennan's warning echoed in her head. Don't touch him. Tracy walked into the living room. Jason sat in the playpen, quiet, his small body tilted to the side. When he saw her, he didn't smile, didn't cry, just watched her with those sad, knowing eyes. She knelt beside the playpen. Hey, sweetheart. Jason blinked slowly. Tracy's hands trembled. I'm going to help you, okay? I promise. She lifted him carefully out of the playpen. The second her hands touched him, she felt it. His body was rigid, tense, like every muscle was bracing for pain. Oh, baby, she whispered, cradling him close. What's been happening to you? She carried him upstairs to the nursery. Her heart hammered with every step. Inside, she laid him gently on the changing table and began examining him the way she'd learned years ago during her nursing assistant training. His spine curved when he lay flat, his left shoulder sat higher than his right, and when she carefully tried to straighten him, he whimpered. Tracy's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She looked at the crib. The expensive bumpers, the designer bedding, everything Maria had chosen before she died. Then she noticed it. One section of the bumper had come loose from its ties. It was bunched up thick on the left side, creating a wall. Tracy's breath caught. If a baby slept against that every night, his body would have to curve to fit. His leg would press against it for hours, months. She lifted Jason again and gently examined his left leg. There, just above the ankle, a dark mark, deep, old, the kind that comes from constant pressure over time. Tracy's hands shook as the pieces fell into place. This baby had been sleeping in the same twisted position for months, and his soft, growing bones had been adapting, curving, compensating. "Oh God," she breathed. "Nobody's been checking on you at night." She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and started taking photos. The crib, the bunched bumper, Jason's curved spine, the mark on his leg. Evidence. She heard a car door slam outside. Tracy's heart stopped. She looked out the window. Mrs. Brennan was back early. Tracy quickly put Jason back in the playpen, shoved her phone in her pocket, and grabbed her cleaning supplies. The front door opened. "Tracy." Mrs. Brennan's voice was cold. "I'm here," Tracy called out, her voice shaking. The nanny appeared in the doorway, her eyes scanning the room. Then they landed on Jason. He was facing the wrong direction in the playpen. Mrs. Brennan's face darkened. "You touched him. I told you not to touch him." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "What were you doing up here?" Tracy's mind raced. "I heard him crying." "Lying won't help you." Mrs. Brennan pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Mr. Turner. You're done." "Wait." "No. You've crossed the line for the last time." Tracy stood frozen as the nanny dialed. In her pocket, her phone felt like it was burning a hole through her jeans. She had the evidence. She had proof. But in 30 seconds, Leonard Turner was going to fire her. And once she was gone, no one would ever look at that crib again. No one would ever see what she saw. Jason would keep sleeping in that position, keep crying in pain, until the damage became permanent. Tracy's hands curled into fists. She had one choice left, and she had about 10 seconds to make it. "Mr. Turner? It's Mrs. Brennan. We have a problem." Tracy watched the nanny pace the living room, phone pressed to her ear. "The cleaning woman has been interfering with Jason. I've warned her multiple times, but she won't listen. She was upstairs in the nursery when I explicitly told her not to be." Silence. Then Mrs. Brennan's voice turned colder. "I think it's best if we let her go. Today." Tracy's stomach dropped. Mrs. Brennan hung up. "Mr. Turner will be home in 20 minutes. You can wait outside." "Please," Tracy said quietly. "Just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. You don't follow instructions. You overstep. And frankly, I don't trust you." The nanny walked away, leaving Tracy standing alone in the middle of the house. 20 minutes. That's all she had. Tracy looked at Jason in the playpen. He was watching her, his eyes tired and sad. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and opened the photos she'd taken. The crib, the bunched bumper, the mark on Jason's leg. It wasn't enough. She needed more. She needed someone to believe her. Quickly, she opened her browser and searched. "Free legal help, low-income families." A number popped up. "Legal aid clinic." She dialed. "Legal aid services. How can I help you?" Tracy's voice trembled. "I need help. I work as a maid, and the baby in the house is being hurt. Not on purpose, but no one's seeing it. I have photos, but I'm about to lose my job, and I don't know what to do." The woman on the other end was calm. "Okay. Tell me what you've seen." Tracy explained everything. The crying, the curved spine, the crib bumper, the mark on Jason's leg. "Do you have medical documentation?" the woman asked. "No. I'm just the cleaning woman. I can't take him to a doctor without permission." "Then the photos help, but they're not enough to file a protective order. We'd need a doctor to confirm what you're seeing." Tracy's heart sank. "So I can't do anything?" "You can report it to Child Protective Services. They can investigate. But I need to be honest with you, without medical proof, and with the family having resources for lawyers, this could be difficult." What if I just took him to a hospital? Without parental consent? That's custodial interference. You could be arrested. Tracy closed her eyes. So, I'm supposed to just watch him suffer? The woman paused. I didn't say that. I'm saying you need to be prepared for what might happen if you act. This family has power. You don't. That's the reality. Tracy heard a car pull into the driveway. I have to go, she whispered. She hung up just as Leonard walked through the door. He looked exhausted, angry, broken. Mrs. Brennan appeared immediately. Mr. Turner, thank you for coming. As I mentioned, Tracy has repeatedly. I know what you said. Leonard's voice was flat. He turned to Tracy. Is it true? You went into the nursery after being told not to? Tracy's throat was tight. Yes. Why? Because your son is in pain, and no one's listening to him. Leonard's jaw clenched. Jason is fine. Mrs. Brennan has everything under control. He's not fine. Tracy's voice broke. His spine is curving. There's a mark on his leg from sleeping in the same position every night. The crib bumper is bunched up, and it's hurting him. Mrs. Brennan's face went red. That's absurd. It's the truth, Tracy said, her eyes locked on Leonard. And if you don't believe me, just look at him. Really, look at him. Leonard stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he turned toward the playpen, walked over slowly, looked down at his son. Jason sat there, his little body tilted, his face tired and sad. For a long moment, Leonard just stared. Then he looked back at Tracy, his eyes filled with something she couldn't name. Get out, he said quietly. Tracy's heart shattered. Mr. Turner, I said get out. Mrs. Brennan smiled, and Tracy realized she'd just lost everything. But as she walked toward the door, phone heavy in her pocket, one thought burned through her mind. She still had the photos. She still had the legal aid number, and she still had a choice to make. Tracy sat in her car outside the mansion, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. She'd been fired. It was over. She pulled out her phone and stared at the photos of Jason, the bunched bumper, the mark on his leg, the curve in his spine. Then she looked at the legal aid number still open on her screen. Without medical proof, this could be difficult. You could be arrested. This family has power. You don't. Tracy's hands shook. She thought about Malik waiting for her at home, about her mama, about the bills she couldn't pay now that this job was gone. She thought about everything she'd just lost. Then she thought about Jason's eyes, and she made the call. Child Protective Services, how can I help you? Tracy's voice cracked. I need to report a child in danger. Inside the mansion, Leonard stood at the window, watching Tracy's car in the driveway. She's still out there, Mrs. Brennan said from behind him. Should I call security? Leonard didn't answer. He just stared. Mrs. Brennan crossed her arms. I told you she was trouble. These people always overstep. They think because they clean your house, they have a right to. Stop talking. The nanny's mouth snapped shut. Leonard turned and looked at Jason in the playpen. Really looked. The way the baby sat, the tilt in his body, the quiet, exhausted way he just existed. When was the last time the pediatrician actually examined him? Leonard asked quietly. Mrs. Brennan blinked. We had an appointment 3 months ago. Did the doctor watch him sleep? Check his crib? Look at his positioning? Well, no. But, did you mention the crying? Mrs. Brennan's face flushed. Children cry, Mr. Turner. It's normal. How much does he cry? Silence. Leonard's voice dropped. How much? He's fussier than most, Mrs. Brennan admitted. But I've raised dozens of children. Some are just difficult. Leonard walked to the playpen and knelt down. Jason looked up at him with those same tired, sad eyes. And for the first time in 8 months, Leonard actually saw his son. Not Maria's baby. Not a reminder of what he'd lost. His son, who was in pain. Call the pediatrician, Leonard said, his voice shaking. Now. Mrs. Brennan hesitated. Mr. Turner, I really don't think. I said now. The nanny flinched, pulled out her phone, and dialed. Outside, Tracy was still on the phone with CPS. A social worker will come by within 48 hours to assess the situation, the woman said. But I need to warn you, if the family disputes your claims and you have no medical evidence, this could go nowhere. I understand, Tracy whispered. And if they pursue legal action against you for making a false report, it's not false. I believe you. But belief isn't proof. Tracy hung up and stared at the mansion. 48 hours. That's how long Jason had to wait. 48 more hours of pain, of crying, of no one really seeing him. Unless… Tracy looked at the hospital address she'd searched earlier on her phone. UCSF Medical Center, 15 minutes away. She looked at the house, at the window where Leonard stood. Then she looked at the clock. Mrs. Brennan's car was still in the driveway. Leonard's too. But in about an hour, Leonard always left for his afternoon meetings, and Mrs. Brennan always took her walk. 1 hour, one chance. Tracy closed her eyes and prayed for the first time in months. God, if you're listening, I need you to tell me what to do, because I don't know anymore. Her phone buzzed. A text from Malik. Love you, Mom. Hope work is good today. Tracy's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the house one more time. And then she made a decision that would either save a child's life or destroy her own. Tracy didn't go back to the mansion that day. She went home, held Malik, tried to pretend everything was fine. But that night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Jason's face, that curve in his spine, the mark on his leg that told a story no one else wanted to read. Saturday morning, Malik wanted to go to the park. Tracy watched him run across the grass, his body moving freely, naturally. No pain, no stiffness, just a healthy 6-year-old being a kid. Jason couldn't do that. Jason could barely sit without hurting. Mama, why are you sad? Malik asked, running back to her. Tracy pulled him close. Just thinking about work, baby. Do you like your new job? She didn't know how to answer. Sunday, she visited her mama at the care home. Her mother took one look at her face and knew. What's wrong, baby girl? Tracy told her everything. The crying, the neglect, the evidence on her phone she was too scared to use. What do I do, Mama? If I speak up, I lose the job. We can't pay your bills, can't afford Malik's medicine. Her mother held her hand. I raised you to know the difference between the hard choice and the right choice. They're the same thing this time. They usually are. But you need this place. Malik needs his inhaler. We survived before this job, her mama said gently. We'll survive after. But baby, could you survive knowing you stayed silent while a child suffered? Would you want Malik growing up, thinking that's who his mama is? Tracy's eyes filled with tears. Her mother squeezed her hand. Some things matter more than money. You know that. That night, Tracy sat at her kitchen table, staring at the bills spread in front of her. Malik's prescription, $200. Her mama's care home, $3,500. Rent, $1,800. She couldn't afford any of it without that job, and she'd already lost it. So what did she have left to lose? She picked up her phone and opened the photos of Jason. Then she looked at the hospital address. Her hands trembled as she made a plan. Tomorrow was Monday. Leonard would be in his office all day. Mrs. Brennan would leave for her afternoon break. Tracy still had her keys to the house. She could go back, get Jason, take him to the hospital herself. It was insane, illegal, could get her arrested. But it might be the only way to save him. She thought about her mama's words. Could you survive, knowing you stayed silent? She thought about Malik, about the kind of person she wanted him to see when he looked at her. She thought about Jason crying alone in that crib, night after night, while his body slowly broke. And she knew what she had to do, even if it destroyed her, even if she went to jail, even if she lost everything. Because some children don't have anyone else. And sometimes, God puts you in a place not because it's easy, but because you're the only one willing to see. Tracy set her alarm for 6 a.m. Tomorrow, she'd go back to that house one last time, and she'd walk out with Jason in her arms. Or she wouldn't walk out at all. Monday morning, 2 p.m. Tracy's hands shook as she turned the key in the lock. The house was quiet. Leonard's car was gone. Mrs. Brennan had left 10 minutes ago for her afternoon walk. Tracy stepped inside, her heart hammering so loud she could barely hear anything else. She climbed the stairs, pushed open the nursery door. Jason lay in his crib, awake, crying softly. When he saw her, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe even hope. I'm so sorry, baby, Tracy whispered, lifting him carefully. But I'm going to help you now, I promise. She wrapped him in a blanket, grabbed the diaper bag, and walked out. Her hands trembled the entire drive to the hospital. At UCSF Medical Center, Tracy walked straight to the emergency desk. "This baby needs help. His spine is curving. There's a mark on his leg. He's been sleeping in a dangerous position for months." The nurse's eyes widened. "Are you his mother?" "No, I was his caregiver. Please, just examine him." Within minutes, a doctor came, then another. They took Jason into an exam room, and then hospital security arrived. "Ma'am, we need you to stay here. The baby's father has been contacted." Tracy's stomach dropped. "I can explain. You'll need to speak with the police. They're on their way." 20 minutes later, Leonard burst through the doors like a storm. His face was red, his eyes wild. "Where is my son? Where is she?" A police officer stepped forward. "Mr. Turner, your son is being examined, and this woman is being detained for custodial interference." Leonard's eyes found Tracy across the waiting room. The rage on his face made her knees weak. Then a doctor emerged, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a serious expression. "Mr. Turner, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, pediatric orthopedist. We need to talk about your son." Leonard barely glanced at her. "I want her arrested. She took my child without permission." "Mr. Turner," Dr. Chen's voice was firm. "Please, sit down." Something in her tone made him stop. He sat. Dr. Chen pulled out a tablet showing x-rays. "Your son has positional plagiocephaly and developing scoliosis. His spine has been curving due to chronic pressure from sleeping in one position for an extended period." Leonard stared at the images. What are you saying?" "I'm saying this woman likely saved your son from needing surgery." Dr. Chen showed him photos. The crib bumper in his nursery had come loose and bunched up. It forced him to sleep on his right side every night. For months, his developing bones adapted to the restriction. She showed him the mark on Jason's leg. "This is from constant compression. If this had continued another few months, he would have needed spinal fusion, possibly braces for years." The color drained from Leonard's face. "But," the pediatrician said, "he was fine." "When was he last examined during sleep? When did anyone check his nighttime positioning?" Silence. Dr. Chen's voice softened. "Mr. Turner, this wasn't intentional harm, but it was neglect. And this woman," she gestured to Tracy, "she saw what everyone else missed." Leonard looked at Tracy, then at Jason, sleeping peacefully in the doctor's arms, finally comfortable for the first time in months. Then, his face crumpled. "Oh God," he whispered. "What have I done?" He buried his face in his hands, his whole body shaking. "I couldn't look at him. After Maria died, I couldn't. Every time I saw his face, I saw her, so I stopped looking." His voice broke. "And he was suffering, right in front of me, and I didn't see it." He looked up at Tracy, tears streaming down his face. "You tried to tell me. You risked everything to tell me. And I threatened you." Tracy's throat was tight. "I just wanted him to be okay." The police officer cleared his throat. "Mr. Turner, do you want to press charges?" Leonard stared at Tracy for a long moment. Then he stood and walked over to her. "No," he said quietly. "She saved my son's life." He turned to the officer. "I'm not pressing charges. She's a hero. And his voice cracked, "I'm the one who should be arrested." The charges were dropped that afternoon. Tracy sat in the hospital waiting room, exhausted, watching Leonard hold Jason for what seemed like the first time in months. The baby was calm, comfortable, finally seen. Dr. Chen explained the treatment plan. Physical therapy 3 times a week, special positioning for sleep, regular monitoring. With intervention now, he should recover fully within 6 to 8 months. Leonard's voice was barely a whisper. And if she hadn't brought him in? Surgery, bracing, possibly permanent complications. He closed his eyes, his son sleeping peacefully against his chest. Later, Leonard found Tracy in the hallway. "I don't know how to apologize for what I did to you." Tracy shook her head. "You were drowning. I understand grief. I couldn't watch Jason drown with you." Leonard's eyes filled. "I fired you, threatened you, and you still saved him. He's a baby. He needed someone. He needed his father." Leonard's voice cracked, and I wasn't there. Silence settled between them. Then Leonard spoke again. "Come back, not as a maid, as Jason's caregiver, someone who actually sees him." He paused. "Bring your son. Your mother. I'll cover everything. Medical bills, school, whatever you need. Tracy stared at him. Mr. Turner. Leonard, please. His voice was raw. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure you never have to choose between doing right and surviving again. 3 months later, the mansion felt different. Warmer somehow. Tracy sat in the living room watching Malik and Jason play together on the floor. Jason's spine was straightening. His smile was real now, bright and beautiful. Her mother sat nearby reading a book, peaceful and cared for. Leonard came in from his office, something he did every hour now, checking on Jason, being present. How's he doing? Leonard asked, kneeling beside his son. He's perfect, Tracy said softly. Jason reached for his father, and Leonard lifted him, holding him close. I'm learning, Leonard whispered, how to be his dad again, how to see him without only seeing her. She'd be proud of you, Tracy said. Leonard's eyes glistened. I think she'd be proud of you, for seeing what I was too broken to see. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Leonard found Tracy in the kitchen. I started a foundation, he said quietly, in Maria's name. Free medical screenings for families who can't afford them. So other children don't fall through the cracks. He paused. I want you to run it. Tracy's breath caught. Leonard, you saved my son by refusing to be invisible. Now help me make sure no child is invisible again. Tracy looked out the window at the bay, the sun setting gold and warm. She thought about her mama's words. The measure of a person isn't what they have, it's who they are, when no one's watching. She thought about that first day, hearing Jason cry, feeling small and powerless. And she thought about how God doesn't always call the powerful. Sometimes he calls the ones willing to see. I'll do it, she whispered. Jason's laughter drifted from upstairs where Malik was reading him a story. And for the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt like home. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the loudest truth. Sometimes the person with nothing has everything that matters. And sometimes, loving a child you didn't birth takes more courage than anything else in the world. If this story touched you, share it. Because somewhere, someone needs to hear it. Someone needs to know that speaking up even when you're scared, even when you're small, can change everything. Thank you for watching. And remember, you are seen, you are heard, and your voice matters more than you know. The safe's door gaped open like a dare. She froze in the silence. Her reflection in the steel glaring back. Was this trust or a trap? The morning sun spilled over the sprawling glass walls of Ward Estate, but its warmth never seemed to touch Ethan Ward. He sat at the head of a 12-foot mahogany table, a single plate in front of him, untouched scrambled eggs, cooling toast, and coffee black enough to match the mood that clung to him like a second skin. His phone buzzed once, then again. Emails, stock updates, reminders from his assistant. He ignored them all. His gaze instead drifted to the far corner of the room, to the heavy vault door embedded in the wall. Polished steel, always locked, a silent witness to his life. Inside, millions sat in neatly banded stacks, symbols of success, symbols of protection, symbols of the fact that over the years you could never really trust anyone. Ethan had learned that the hard way, first from a business partner who siphoned funds from their company, then from a fiancé who had taken her ring and half his trust fund to start a new life somewhere sunny. People always had a price. Always. In another part of the city, Amara Johnson slipped into her crisp black uniform and knotted her hair into a bun so tight it pulled at her scalp. She left her tiny apartment with its flickering hallway light, locking the door behind her. The morning air smelled faintly of diesel and fried dough from the corner bakery. Amara worked 3 jobs, 2 part-time and 1 full-time, the latter being at Ward Estate. It paid better than most, but it came with the constant hum of being watched, weighed and judged, not by cameras necessarily, but by the eyes of wealth, which could be more cutting than any lens. She'd been at it for nearly 2 years, long enough to know Ethan's routines, his habits, even the way he set down his coffee cup with a controlled precision. He wasn't cruel, but there was a wall around him, a cold, impenetrable thing. And she'd learned to keep her own wall just as high. By the time she arrived at the estate, the sun was higher, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. The driveway was lined with imported maple trees whose leaves barely dared to fall out of place. She stepped inside through the service entrance, the faint scent of lemon polish and expensive cologne hitting her immediately. Marta, the cook, gave her a tired smile from the kitchen. "Morning, Amara." "He's in the dining room," Marta whispered, as though speaking too loudly might crack the fragile air of the house. Amara nodded, slipping past with the silent efficiency of someone used to being invisible. In the dining room, Ethan glanced up briefly as she entered, then back down at his phone. She set about her work, dusting shelves, straightening picture frames, running a cloth over the gleaming surface of the sideboard. If Ethan noticed the faint slump in her shoulders, he didn't show it. If Amara noticed the untouched breakfast, she didn't ask. They lived in a dance of polite detachment. She never lingered, he never pried. But today, as Ethan sipped his coffee, a thought formed in his mind, sharp, deliberate, and a little cruel. What if... He'd done it before, with contractors, assistants, even his own cousin once, leaving something valuable within reach to see what they'd do. A private test, a small thrill in a life otherwise sterile. He set his cup down, the faint click echoing in the stillness. "Amara," he said, his voice smooth but unreadable, "make sure the study gets extra attention today. I'll be out for a few hours." Her eyes flicked to his, then away. "Yes, sir." By noon, Ethan was gone, the low growl of his Aston Martin fading down the driveway. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. In the study, Amara opened the double doors, inhaling the faint scent of leather and cedar from the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. She began dusting, starting with the top shelves, working her way down. And then she saw it, the safe. It was open, not wide, but just enough for the light to catch on what was inside. Bundles of cash, crisp and perfect, and a gleam of diamonds in a black velvet pouch. For a moment, she froze. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, each second dragging like a heavy chain. She stepped closer. Not because she wanted the money, God knew she didn't, but because her stomach tightened with something sharper than temptation. This was no accident. Someone like Ethan didn't forget to lock a safe. The insult settled over her like dust, fine, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore. Her reflection stared back at her in the steel door, eyes darker than usual, mouth pressed into a line. She took a deep breath, reached out, and with a firm but measured motion, pushed the door shut until it clicked. Then she turned away, her heart still tight in her chest. If someone you worked for tested your integrity without telling you, would you confront them, walk away, or prove them wrong in silence? Drop your answer in the comments. Let's talk trust. Ethan Ward sat in his car, engine idling in the private parking garage beneath his downtown office building, phone balanced in his palm. He wasn't checking emails. He wasn't reading market reports. Instead, he was streaming live footage from the estate's internal security system, a habit he'd never admit aloud. The grainy camera in the study captured Amara dusting the shelves, methodical as always. Then she reached the desk. The safe sat partially open, an invitation dressed as carelessness. Ethan leaned forward, thumb hovering over the pause button, as if that might still the moment. She stopped, looked. For a heartbeat, he swore she was going to reach inside. The tiniest movement of her hand toward the gap sent a jolt through him. Not excitement exactly, but something sharper, hungrier. Instead, she simply shut it, firmly, deliberately. No hesitation. Ethan sat back, exhaling slowly. But it wasn't pride or relief flooding his chest. It was confusion. Her posture, straight-backed but heavy. Her face, impassive but shadowed. He'd seen enough people walk away from money to know the difference between indifference and insult. Amara wasn't unaffected. She was offended. Back at the estate, Amara carried on with her duties, each motion clipped, precise, like she was keeping herself from shattering something. She didn't linger in the study a second longer than necessary. When Ethan returned late that afternoon, she was in the kitchen with Marta, wiping down the counters. "Afternoon," he said casually, stepping inside. "Good evening, sir," Amara replied without looking at him, her voice polite but hollow. He paused. Normally, she'd at least meet his eyes when speaking. "Everything in order today?" "Yes, sir." That was it. No small updates about the pantry, no quiet note about the roses blooming in the garden, things she usually mentioned in passing. Ethan almost asked if she'd noticed anything unusual, but the words died before reaching his tongue. That night, in his study, he poured himself a whiskey and replayed the footage again. Her hesitation, the way she shut the safe, that faint tightening in her jaw. It should have satisfied him. The test was passed, but instead, it gnawed at him, burrowing under his skin. Why had it mattered to him how she felt? The next morning, their dance of detachment continued. She moved through the halls like a ghost in black, her footsteps soft but deliberate. Ethan found himself watching her longer than usual, waiting for a crack in the mask she wore. At one point, as she polished the silver tray in the living room, he caught her reflection in the glass window. Her eyes flicked toward him briefly, then dropped again. No hostility, no warmth, just distance. It irritated him more than he expected. Later that day, he intercepted her in the hallway outside the study. "Amara," he said, his tone casual but probing. "How long have you been working here now?" "Almost 2 years, sir. And in all that time, I've never had a reason to doubt you." Her eyes met his then, and for the first time since the test, he saw the quiet storm behind them. "Good to know," she said flatly, before stepping past him. The words were polite. The delivery was not. Ethan stood there for a long moment, the echo of her voice clinging to him like smoke. That evening, Marta found Amara in the pantry, staring at the rows of neatly labeled jars. "You okay?" Marta asked softly. Amara forced a smile. "Just tired." But inside she was anything but tired. She was disappointed that even after nearly 2 years of honest work, she was still just another suspect in her employer's eyes. She hadn't touched the money. Not because she feared getting caught, but because she'd promised herself long ago she wouldn't let desperation dictate her morals. And yet, the sting of being tested without cause lingered. Ethan, meanwhile, sat in the study, swirling the last inch of whiskey in his glass. His gaze flicked to the safe. What had he been hoping for? To catch her stealing, to prove himself right about people. Instead, all he'd done was build another wall between them. But why did that matter so much now? He set the glass down and rubbed his temples. This wasn't over. Do you think Ethan should admit to Amara that he left the safe open on purpose? Or would that make things worse? Comment below. Your take might just be the next plot twist. The next 3 days passed like a chess match no one wanted to admit they were playing. Moves and counter-moves. Avoidance as strategy. Ethan noticed Amara was more efficient than ever, her work spotless, her timing precise, her presence nearly invisible. If she was in the same room as him, she was on the far side of it. If he entered a room, she'd find a reason to leave within minutes. It was infuriating. Not because she was failing at her job, if anything she was performing flawlessly, but because she was treating him like a stranger. On the 4th morning, he lingered in the kitchen as she loaded the dishwasher. "You've been quiet lately," he said, leaning against the counter. "Just keeping busy," she replied, without looking up. Her tone was smooth, but it had an edge, like a blade sheathed in velvet. "Everything all right?" he pressed. "Yes, sir." The "sir" landed heavier than usual, like she was building a wall out of formality. Ethan almost blurted it out. "I tested you. You passed." "I was wrong." But the words stayed trapped behind pride and the habit of control. That evening, he sat in the study with the safe closed, locked and humming quietly in its place. He told himself he'd imagined the shift in her behavior, but the truth was harder to swallow. He had caused it. His phone buzzed. A text from his friend Julian. "Drinks tonight? You look like you need to get out of your own head." Ethan almost declined, but something in him wanted distance from the estate, from the heavy air Amara left in her wake. At the bar, Julian laughed too loudly and flirted with the waitress, but Ethan barely heard him. His thoughts kept circling back to the image of Amara closing the safe, her jaw tight, her eyes shadowed. Julian finally asked, "What's eating you? You look like you lost a bet." Ethan smirked faintly. "Something like that." The next morning, Marta found Amara polishing the silver again, even though it gleamed. "You're going to rub a hole in that tray," Marta teased gently. Amara shrugged. "Better than sitting still." Marta gave her a knowing look. "You're upset with him." Amara paused, cloth in hand. "I'm not upset, just reminded." "Of what?" "That some people will never see you for who you are, only for what they're afraid you might be." Marta didn't push further, but her eyes softened with quiet sympathy. Later that day, Ethan caught Amara in the library, dusting the top shelves. "I've been thinking," he said. She didn't turn around. "About what, sir?" He hesitated. "About trust." Finally she faced him, her gaze steady but unreadable. "Trust is a two-way street." He nodded slowly, but before he could reply, her phone rang, a soft chime that seemed almost out of place in the quiet room. She glanced at the screen, then excused herself without another word. Ethan stood there, staring at the space she'd just occupied, feeling the conversation slip away like water through his fingers. That night, lying in bed, he told himself he'd drop it. He had more important things to focus on: investments, property acquisitions, a meeting with the mayor next week. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her hand pressing the safe shut, not taking, not tempted, just refusing. And somehow, that refusal felt like a judgment against him personally. When someone pulls away after being hurt, do you believe it's better to give them space or push for a conversation? Share your thoughts below. This is where the story could turn either way. The storm rolled in without warning, thick clouds swallowing the late afternoon light, wind howling like it had a score to settle. By the time Amara finished vacuuming the hallway rugs, the first thunderclap rattled the estate's high windows. Marta poked her head into the hall. "Road advisories are out. Power lines are down in the next county over. I'll head out now before it gets worse," Amara said, untying her apron. Marta frowned. "Driveway's already blocked. A maple came down across the lower bend. Grounds crew won't be able to clear it until morning." Before Amara could reply, Ethan appeared at the top of the staircase, one hand resting on the polished banister. "You're staying here tonight." His tone was more command than suggestion. Amara's spine stiffened. "I can walk down to the main road." "In this?" He gestured toward the window where rain lashed sideways against the glass. "You'd be soaked and probably flattened by a tree branch before you made it 100 yards. Her lips pressed together, the protest dying in her throat. She hated feeling cornered, especially by him. Marta busied herself making dinner, leaving the two of them in a silence that felt both fragile and unyielding. The dining table was set for 3, but when Marta excused herself early, muttering something about checking the generator, Ethan and Amara were left alone. He cleared his throat. "Sit. You've been on your feet all day." She sat, but her posture remained perfectly straight, like she was bracing for impact. They ate in near silence, the clink of silverware loud against the rain's constant drumbeat. Halfway through, Ethan spoke. "You ever get tired of the quiet here?" Her eyes lifted from her plate. "I'm used to quiet." "That's not what I asked." She hesitated. "Sometimes it's nice. Sometimes it's heavy." "Yeah," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Heavy's a good word for it." After dinner, the storm knocked the power out completely. Darkness swallowed the estate, broken only by the flicker of the fireplace Ethan lit in the study. Amara lingered in the doorway, unsure if she should retreat to the guest room or join him. He looked up from the fire. "You're welcome to sit. Safer than pacing dark hallways." She stepped inside slowly, perching on the far end of the leather sofa. The fire's crackle filled the space between them. Outside, branches scraped the windows, wind howling through unseen cracks. "You grew up here?" she asked suddenly. Ethan shook his head. "No. Bought it when the company went public. It felt like proof." "Proof of what?" "That I'd made it. That I was untouchable." He smirked faintly, gaze fixed on the flames. Turns out being untouchable just means no one gets close. Amara studied him for a moment, then looked away. Some people like it that way. Do you? Her laugh was quiet, but humorless. Doesn't matter what I like. You learn to live with what you're given. The fire popped, sending a small ember floating upward before it faded. Neither spoke for a while, but something in the air shifted, still heavy, but no longer impenetrable. When a particularly loud gust rattled the window pane, she glanced toward it, then back to him. If this house blows away, I'm blaming you. The corner of his mouth lifted, just a fraction. Fair enough. It was the smallest crack in the wall between them, but it was there. Have you ever been stuck with someone you were avoiding, and did it make things better or worse? Drop your story in the comments. I'm curious how that tension plays out in real life. The storm refused to let up. By morning, the estate grounds glistened with puddles, and branches littered the driveway like fallen matchsticks. The hum of the backup generator was the only sign of life besides the rain. Marta had driven her small SUV as far as the road allowed to meet her husband, leaving Ethan and Amara alone. After breakfast, Amara gathered the cleaning supplies, determined to busy herself. But when she passed the study, Ethan's voice stopped her. Amara, come here a second. She stepped inside, wary. He was at the desk, a leather-bound photo album open in front of him. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair opposite. I still have rooms to... They'll wait. She hesitated, then sat. He turned the album toward her. Old photographs, grainy, sun-faded images of a boy in hand-me-down clothes standing in front of a rusted trailer. That's me, Ethan said quietly. She blinked, glancing between him and the boy in the picture. You grew up? In the middle of nowhere, with a father who drank more than he worked and a mother who disappeared before I could walk. I learned early that if I wanted something, I'd have to take it, and if I wanted to keep it, I'd have to protect it from everyone, because sooner or later, they'd try to take it back. His tone was matter-of-fact, but his eyes stayed fixed on the photographs as if looking at her might make the admission too raw. Amara leaned back slightly. That's why you don't trust anyone. That's why I test people, he corrected, though the word sounded hollow even to him. She let a long moment pass before speaking. You know what I learned early? He met her gaze, waiting. That your word is the only thing you can't afford to lose. Money comes and goes. Jobs, too. But if people stop believing your word, you've got nothing. It wasn't said with heat or anger, just a quiet conviction that landed heavier than any accusation. Ethan didn't reply immediately. He studied her, as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the version he'd been keeping in his head. Is that why you shut the safe? He asked finally. Her brows rose. I shut the safe because it wasn't mine to open, not because I thought you'd thank me for it. The air between them tightened, but it wasn't quite hostility. It was truth. They spent the rest of the morning in the study, him leafing through the album, her dusting the shelves in a slower, more thoughtful rhythm. Around noon, when the rain eased to a drizzle, they moved to the kitchen. Ethan boiled water for tea, a rare gesture from a man who usually had everything prepared for him. He set the steaming mug in front of her. For the record, you've given me more reason to trust you than anyone in years. She looked at him for a long moment before replying, Then, maybe stop looking for reasons not to. It wasn't a truce, not yet, but it was the first bridge built between two very stubborn shores. If someone from your past shaped the way you trust, or don't trust, people now, what happened? Share if you're comfortable. Stories like that are often more relatable than we think. By late afternoon, the storm had softened to a gentle rain, and the estate felt oddly peaceful. The constant hum of the generator had faded into the background, replaced by the steady drip of water from the gutters outside. Amara was in the kitchen, carefully slicing bread for sandwiches, when Ethan walked in carrying a dusty box. What's that? She asked. Board games, he said, with an almost sheepish shrug. Figured we could try not sitting in separate rooms pretending we don't exist. Her brows arched. You play board games? I used to, he said, setting the box on the counter. "Mostly when the power went out, back when the only entertainment we had was candles and a deck of cards." There was something almost boyish in the way he said it. They ended up in the study with a game of Scrabble spread out between them, the fire once again crackling in the hearth. At first, the conversation was sparse, the occasional word about the tiles on the board, but slowly something shifted. When Ethan placed the word wealthy across a triple word score, Amara smirked. "Shocking choice." "You could challenge it," he teased. "I'm more interested in making lonely intersect it," she replied, laying her tiles down with a quiet satisfaction. He chuckled, a sound she hadn't heard from him before. Not polite, not measured, just real. As the game went on, they drifted into stories. Ethan told her about the time he and Julian, as teenagers, had tried to borrow a neighbor's canoe and ended up sinking it in the middle of a lake. Amara laughed so hard she had to set her tiles down. "I can't imagine you in a canoe. You probably wore cufflinks." "I was 14, he said, grinning. "I didn't own cufflinks. Yet." In turn, she told him about her younger sister Maya, how she'd worked 3 jobs to put her through nursing school, how Maya had been the reason she never let her pride slip, no matter how bad things got. "That's incredible," he said softly. "You did all that for her?" "She's family," Amara replied simply, as though that was all the explanation needed. The rain picked up again after sunset, but inside the air was warmer, not from the fire, but from the ease that had settled between them. At one point, when the power flickered and the lights dimmed, Ethan rose to light more candles. The glow caught the sharp planes of his face, softening them in ways Amara hadn't seen before. "You ever think," he said, as he set a candle on the table, "that maybe the people we trust the least are the ones we should give the most chance to prove us wrong?" Her gaze held his for a long moment. "And you ever think that if you stopped testing people, you might find out they were worth trusting all along?" Neither looked away first. By the time they packed up the game, the room smelled faintly of melting wax and wood smoke. It was the first time in 2 years Amara had lingered in the study after finishing her work, and the first time Ethan had wanted her to. And for both of them, that realization felt like the beginning of something they weren't ready to name. Do you think lighter moments are the key to rebuilding trust? Or do serious conversations do more? Share your thoughts. This debate is as old as relationships themselves. The next morning brought clear skies, sunlight streaming through the estate's high windows like a quiet promise that the storm had passed. Ethan found himself in the kitchen earlier than usual, brewing coffee. Amara walked in, hair slightly looser than normal, her expression calm. They exchanged a small, unspoken smile, an acknowledgement of the strange, unplanned companionship the storm had forced on them. It might have been a good day. It should have been. Until the doorbell rang. Ethan opened the door to find Clara standing there, his ex-fiancée, perfectly styled, lips curved in a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well," she said, stepping inside without invitation, "you still live in this museum of yours?" "What do you want, Clara?" Ethan asked, his voice cool. "I was in town. Thought I'd drop by, catch up." Her gaze drifted toward the kitchen, where Amara had just set down a tray of clean glasses. Clara's smile sharpened. "And who's this?" Before Ethan could answer, Clara continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "I see you've diversified your staff. Very progressive of you." Amara's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Ethan's stomach knotted. He should have spoken up immediately, shut Clara down, made it clear her words were unacceptable. But the old reflex to keep situations controlled, to avoid direct conflict, froze him for just a second too long. And in that second, Clara's smirk deepened. "I suppose someone has to dust all this wealth you hoard." Amara didn't flinch, didn't respond. She simply placed the last glass in the cupboard, nodded politely to Ethan, and walked past both of them toward the service entrance. "Amara," Ethan started, but she didn't stop. The sound of the door clicking shut behind her landed like a gunshot. Clara laughed softly. "Oh, did I interrupt something?" Ethan turned on her, voice low but sharp. "Get out." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me." "You heard me. Get out." A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she shrugged and sauntered toward the door. "Suit yourself. Still touchy, I see." The moment she was gone, Ethan's chest felt too tight. He replayed the scene in his mind, every second of his hesitation magnified until it was unbearable. He found Amara in the staff parking area, unlocking her car. "Amara, wait," he said, approaching quickly. She didn't look at him. "I'm not upset about her, Ethan. I'm upset about you." The words landed like a slap. "You didn't say anything," she continued, her voice steady but charged. "You let her talk to me like that, and you said nothing. 2 days ago you were telling me I'd given you reason to trust me, and today you let someone treat me like I'm less than a person." His mouth opened, but no defense came out. She shook her head. "I've dealt with that my whole life. I don't need it where I work, and I definitely don't need it from someone who claims to see me differently." With that, she got in her car and drove away, leaving him standing in the sunlight that suddenly felt as cold as marble. Back in the study, Ethan sat in silence. The safe loomed in the corner, closed and locked, but now it seemed to mock him. He had tested her once, and she had passed. Now, when he had been tested, he had failed. And he wasn't sure she'd give him another chance. If someone stayed silent when they should have defended you, could you forgive them? Or would that silence speak louder than any apology? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your take. The estate felt emptier than usual, not just quiet, hollow. Ethan sat in the study that evening, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey on the desk. Clara's words had faded, but Amara's, those stayed. "I'm upset about you." It wasn't anger in her voice that haunted him. It was disappointment, the kind that said he had confirmed her worst expectations. He'd spent years convincing himself that his guardedness protected him. But now he could see the truth. It had made him a coward. For the first time in a long time, he didn't try to think his way through the problem. He just felt it. The shame, the regret, the fear that this might be beyond repair. He thought of the way she had shut the safe, the way she had sat across from him in the candlelight, teasing him over a board game, the way she had told him to stop looking for reasons not to trust her, and then the way she had walked away without looking back. By morning, the decision was made. Ethan drove to the city, his car cutting through the light fog that clung to the streets. He parked outside a modest brick apartment building, the kind where tenants hung plants in the windows and kids rode scooters on the sidewalk. He climbed the narrow stairwell to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door marked 3B. It opened a crack. Amara's eyes appeared first, cautious. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk." "I'm not interested in excuses." "Good," he said quickly, "because I don't have one. I only have the truth, and it's this." I froze. I let my pride and my old habits get in the way. I should have defended you. I should have shut her down before she finished her sentence. She studied him for a long moment. "Why didn't you?" "Because for years I've been afraid of conflict, afraid that letting my guard down would make me lose something. But I realized yesterday that I lost something anyway. I lost you." She opened the door a little wider but didn't invite him in. "You don't know me well enough to lose me," she said softly. "I know enough," he replied. "Enough to know I trust you more than anyone. Enough to know I care about you, not as an employee, not as someone who passed my stupid test, but as someone I want in my life." Her gaze dropped for a moment, then lifted again. "Words are easy, Ethan." He nodded. "Then let me prove it." From his coat pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. She didn't take it right away, but her eyes flicked to it. "It's not jewelry," he said, opening it to reveal a simple silver key. "What is that?" "The spare key to my safe," he said quietly. "Because the truth is, you've had it all along. This just makes it official." Silence stretched between them. The hum of the city filtered in from the street below. Car horns, distant voices, the rattle of the L train. Finally, Amara reached out and took the box. "This doesn't fix everything," she said. "I know," he replied, "but maybe it can be a start." For the first time since the storm, her expression softened. "Give me time," she said, as much as you need." When she closed the door, Ethan didn't feel the sting of rejection. He felt the weight of a choice made, and the quiet hope that it might be the right one. If someone admits their failure and makes a real effort to change, do you think trust can fully return, or is it never the same? Share your view. This is one of the toughest calls in any relationship. 2 weeks passed, 2 weeks of polite but brief conversations at work, 2 weeks of Ethan giving her space. No grand gestures, no forced apologies, just quiet consistency. Amara noticed the difference. He no longer hovered near the study door when she came to clean it. He no longer locked the safe when she was in the room, even if he stepped away. He even started brewing extra coffee in the mornings, leaving a steaming mug on the counter with her name written on a sticky note. She never said thank you aloud, but she drank it every time. One Friday evening, after the last of the staff had left, Amara was gathering her things when Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He led her to the garden, where the last traces of sunset bled into the horizon. The air was cool, scented faintly with roses and damp earth. "I wanted to show you something," he said, handing her a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it to find a letter, formal at first, but quickly giving way to something more personal. "I am sorry I made you feel small. I am sorry I hesitated when you needed me to stand tall. You have shown me more integrity than most people I've known in my life, and I would be a fool to risk losing that again." Amara read it twice, her fingers tracing the words. "You wrote this?" "I needed you to have it in writing," he said with a small smile. "In case I ever forget, you can remind me." They stood there in silence for a moment, the garden lights flickering on one by one. "I'm not used to people admitting they're wrong," she said finally. "I'm not used to admitting it," he replied, "but for you, I'm willing to get used to it." A laugh escaped her, soft but genuine. "You're still a little full of yourself." "And you're still not afraid to tell me," he said. She handed the letter back, but he shook his head. "It's yours, keep it." Her gaze held his for a long moment, and in that stillness, something shifted. Not a dramatic revelation, but the quiet certainty that the walls between them were no longer unscalable. "I trust you," she said, the words simple but weighted, and for Ethan, it felt like the most valuable thing he had ever been given. They walked back toward the house together, their steps unhurried. At the back door, he paused. "Dinner tomorrow?" he asked. "Not here. Somewhere with good food and bad lighting." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "We'll see." But when she walked away, there was no coldness in it, just the promise that she might say yes. Inside, the study waited, safe closed but unlocked. The key he had given her was nowhere in sight, yet he knew she still had it. That was enough. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a home. Do you believe love and trust can grow stronger after being tested, or is the first crack always there? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to know your perspective. He searched every room. The nursery, empty. The kitchen, empty. The entire mansion, silent. No sign of his maid, no sign of his baby. His heart started to race. Kevin Grant had built empires, moved markets, and controlled everything in his world, except this moment. Then he stepped outside, and what he saw stopped him cold. There, on a stone bench, in the biting morning air, was Gloria, asleep, still in uniform, arms wrapped tightly around baby Emily. A faded blue blanket covered the child, and Gloria's yellow cleaning gloves were still clinging to her hands. Neither of them stirred. For a second, he couldn't breathe. Then, he saw Emily's tiny chest rise, her fingers curled into Gloria's apron, and on Gloria's face, a quiet kind of peace. He didn't understand it. Not yet. But what looked like recklessness was something else entirely, and that moment changed everything. The sky hadn't turned yet. It was still dark in Manhattan. Street lamps flickered against stone buildings, and the wind carried that early-hour stillness. the kind that makes you feel every second of silence. Kevin Grant stood on the marble steps of his estate, barefoot, tense. The cold bit at his skin. But it wasn't the cold that made him shiver. It was the emptiness. He had already checked the nursery. No baby. He'd called the nanny. No answer. Walked every hallway. But the one person who always kept things running, Gloria, his quiet, invisible maid, was nowhere to be found. Then, a flicker of movement near the garden. He stepped off the porch, heart pounding, breath shallow. It wasn't supposed to be like this, not in his house, not in his world. And then, he saw her. Gloria, curled up on the garden bench, back leaned against the cold stone, eyes closed, breathing steady. In her arms, Emily. The baby was wrapped in an old blanket, tucked so closely into Gloria's chest it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Kevin froze. The yellow gloves were still on Gloria's hands, her head tilted back, her arm locked around the child like instinct, like protection. He took a step closer. No words, no reaction. Emily's fingers clung to Gloria's uniform. Her tiny face nestled into the space just below Gloria's chin. Safe. Too safe for this to be an accident. Kevin didn't know why, he didn't know how. But he knew one thing, this wasn't neglect, it was love. Not the kind you buy, the kind you carry, even when it breaks you. And in that still, cold moment, everything Kevin believed about love, family, and what it means to protect something began to crack. But before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this story makes you believe that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones holding our world together. The air hung thick with silence, not peace, not calm, just that heavy kind of stillness you feel when something's not right. Kevin stood frozen beside the garden path, his breath caught halfway between fear and disbelief. Gloria didn't stir. Neither did the baby. He stepped closer. Slowly. The gravel crunched beneath his bare feet. The closer he got, the stranger it all felt. The bench was damp with morning frost. The blanket barely covered Emily's legs. And Gloria. She looked like she hadn't meant to sleep, just hadn't had the strength to stay awake. Her arms were still wrapped around the baby, one yellow-gloved hand tucked under Emily's back, the other across her tiny chest, as if shielding her from the wind. Kevin's mind raced. Why was his daughter out here? Why didn't anyone wake him? Where was the stuff? Why didn't she knock on his door? But none of those questions made it past his lips, because in that moment, all he could see was the way Emily's small body rose and fell gently against Gloria's. Safe. He crouched beside them, carefully. His hand hovered near the child's back, unsure whether to lift her or let her stay. Gloria's eyes fluttered. She blinked, dazed, then saw him. She jolted upright, panic flashing across her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, breathless. He held up a hand, not in anger, just confusion. "Why?" That was all he could manage. Gloria looked down at Emily, then back at him. Her voice cracked. "She was cold, sir. The heat, it stopped working. She cried for hours. I didn't know what else to do." She didn't defend herself, she didn't explain beyond that. She just said it. And Kevin, who had always believed every problem had a solution, every mistake a price, felt something inside him shift. Gloria wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't even trying to be forgiven. She was just tired. Tired in a way no amount of sleep could fix. He looked at her one last time, really looked, at the circles under her eyes, at the trembling in her arms, at the way she hadn't let go of Emily, even in sleep. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel rich, not at all. Kevin stood there, unmoving. The wind had picked up, brushing past the marble columns behind him, but his eyes stayed fixed on the yellow glove still resting against his daughter's back, and on the quiet woman who had been invisible in his home until this very moment. Gloria didn't look up again. She just sat there silent, arms still wrapped around Emily, like a mother clinging to something she couldn't afford to lose twice. Kevin swallowed hard. He didn't know what emotion was hitting him. Guilt, shock, or something far less familiar. All he knew was that he didn't want to raise his voice. Not here. Not now. He stepped back. Gently. His hand brushed across the top of the blanket, just enough to feel the warmth still trapped inside it. It wasn't much, but it had been enough to keep his child safe. And the gloves, still on Gloria's hands, bright yellow, a little torn at the fingertips, smudged with polish and dust. She hadn't even taken them off. Kevin's mind went back to the night before, the text from the staff group chat he hadn't answered, the subtle drop in the thermostat reading he'd dismissed. He remembered walking past the nursery door on his way out, hearing Emily cry and thinking she'd settle soon. He hadn't stopped. He hadn't checked. Now he was here, outside, barefoot, standing beside a bench in the freezing dark, watching the woman he paid to clean his house cradle the only thing in his life that ever truly mattered. Gloria finally spoke again. Her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't want her to cry anymore. She kept her eyes on the child. Not once did she ask for understanding. Not once did she explain herself with pride. She just sat there still, as if ready for whatever judgment would come next. Kevin took a breath, the kind that shakes a little on the way out. I didn't know the heat broke. Gloria nodded slowly. I called maintenance. No one came. A pause. You were at the gala. He didn't remember much about the fundraiser, only that the champagne had been warm and the conversations colder. I was going to rock her, Gloria said, just until she settled. Just for a few minutes. Her voice broke. I didn't mean to fall asleep. Kevin looked down at the child in her arms, now stirring softly, eyelids fluttering. He didn't have words for what he felt, only questions. And most of them weren't for her. They were for himself. He didn't ask her to stand, didn't tell her to explain. He just said quietly, "Come inside." She hesitated. Her arms tightened around the baby, as if part of her believed this was the last time she'd be allowed to hold her. But Kevin didn't reach. He didn't rush. He simply turned and led the way, leaving the front door wide open behind him. She followed. The marble floors felt colder than the bench. The silence inside the house, deeper than it had been outside. Kevin gestured to a seat in the kitchen, not the servants' table tucked behind the pantry, the main one. He didn't sit at first. He just watched as Gloria gently lowered Emily into the bassinet beside the counter, brushing the blanket into place like it was made of gold. Then she sat, still wearing the gloves. She kept her hands folded in her lap. Didn't speak. Didn't blink. Kevin pulled out the chair across from her and finally asked, "Who taught you how to hold a child like that?" A long pause, then she answered, "My daughter." His body stilled. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at a small crack in the tile. Her voice was even, but quiet. Too quiet. "Her name was Ava," she said. "She was 2. Kevin didn't move, not even to breathe. "She got sick one winter," Gloria continued. "We didn't have heat, couldn't afford to keep it running all night. I bundled her up best I could." She pressed her hands together until her knuckles went white. "She had a fever. I tried to bring it down. Wet towels, cold rags. I stayed up holding her, just like I held Emily tonight. I prayed she'd make it to morning." Her throat tightened. "But when I woke up, she was gone." She looked up then just once, and Kevin saw it, the grief she carried like breath. "I failed her." 3 words. That's all. But they landed harder than anything he'd heard in years. "And since that day," she whispered, "I told myself like if I ever held another child I wouldn't let go, not for anything, not even sleep." Silence filled the room again, except this time, it was sacred. Kevin glanced at the bassinet. Emily was still sleeping, and he realized something that pulled at a part of him he didn't know existed. This woman hadn't just saved his child. She was still trying to save her own. He didn't speak for a long time, not because he didn't have words, but because none of them felt worthy. Gloria sat still across the table, eyes lowered, hands folded, gloves still on. The same gloves she wore to scrub the marble floors, the same hands that had held his baby like something irreplaceable. Kevin stood quietly and walked to the edge of the room. He didn't know why. Maybe to breathe, maybe to hide the sting behind his eyes. He'd never asked about her life, never wondered where she went after hours, never noticed when she skipped breaks or stayed late. She was just there, like the furniture, like the silence. But that morning something shifted. He found himself watching her. Later that day, as the sun pushed through the kitchen windows, he passed by the nursery door and paused. Gloria was inside, holding Emily again. Not because she had to, she had already worked through the night, but because Emily reached for her. Her small hands gripped Gloria's collar like instinct, like trust. Gloria rocked gently in the chair by the window, humming low, brushing her fingers across the baby's cheek with the kind of care you can't fake. The kind that doesn't clock out. Kevin didn't go in. He just watched. He watched her fold baby clothes on the floor, one tiny sock at a time. Watched her pick up dropped toys with a patience no one taught her. Watched her rub circles on Emily's back until the child melted into her chest like she belonged there. That night he checked the time cards. Gloria hadn't taken a single day off in almost 7 months. No complaints, no requests. She just showed up, did her job, and somewhere in the cracks of routine, gave his daughter the one thing he hadn't: presence. He thought about the baby's first laugh. He hadn't been home. The first time she crawled. He'd seen it on a nanny cam. But Gloria, she was there. Always there. And for the first time in his life, Kevin Grant, who had built a life on strategy, data, and distance, felt completely, uncomfortably close. Not to failure, but to truth, because the woman he'd barely noticed had been holding his daughter's heart in her hands all along, and somewhere deep inside, he wondered how many more moments he had missed, because he hadn't known what love really looked like. The house was warmer now, not because of the heat, because Kevin had started noticing things. He walked slower through the halls, listened more during breakfast, found himself standing outside the nursery door more often than he used to. But while something in him was softening, not everyone in the house saw it that way. They saw Gloria, and they whispered, "She's too close to the child." Crossing lines. "She's the maid, not the mother." The words floated through the kitchen, folded into side glances, and carried by voices that never said anything to her face. But Gloria heard them. She always heard them. She moved a little quieter after that. Took longer to knock before entering rooms. Avoided eye contact when she handed Emily over. One afternoon, Kevin's sister stopped by. She was holding a glass of wine, eyes sharp. "You trust her too much," she said casually, like it was an observation, not an accusation. "She sleeps in staff quarters. She works all hours. You're blurring lines, Kevin." He didn't respond right away, because deep down, he knew it wasn't lines that were being blurred. It was something deeper than rules, something no policy could explain. That night, Gloria stayed later than usual. Emily had a fever, mild, but Gloria didn't leave her side. When the baby finally drifted off, Gloria slipped out of the room, quiet as ever. She walked down the hall, past the kitchen, and stopped, because there it was again, her name, spoken in a tone that wasn't kind. She thinks she belongs here. She's trying to be something she's not. Gloria didn't cry. She didn't go back to her quarters. She went to the laundry room, sat on the wooden bench near the dryer, hands folded, heart heavy. The next morning, Kevin found a note on the kitchen counter. It wasn't long. Just a thank you, a goodbye, and a quiet promise that she didn't want to cause trouble. Her small suitcase was already packed by the door. She didn't want to be talked about, didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to stay where she wasn't wanted. But before she could reach the gate, Kevin was already waiting, Emily in his arms. No words at first, just the wind between them. Then, softly, "You don't leave the place you belong." He stepped closer, placing the baby gently back in Gloria's arms. "You're not just her nanny. His voice broke. "You're her heart." The house was asleep. For once there were no whispers, no questions, no lines being drawn in quiet corners. Gloria was still awake. She always was. She sat beside the crib, watching Emily breathe. One soft rise, one soft fall. The fever from the day before had passed, or so they thought. But then, a sound, not a cry, not a whimper, just silence. Too long, too still. Gloria leaned over the crib, her breaths short, labored, her tiny hands twitching beneath the blanket. Panic hit fast, but Gloria didn't scream. She lifted the baby gently into her arms and held her close. Kevin was already on his way. Something in him had pulled him from sleep. He turned the hallway corner just as Gloria opened the nursery door. He saw her face first, and then the baby. "Call a doctor," she said, voice shaking. He didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. Within 20 minutes the nursery was full. Machines, wires, cold voices, urgent orders. Kevin stood near the window, helpless. Money moved fast, but not fast enough. Nothing was working. The fever climbed. Emily's skin turned pale. Her breath slowed again. Kevin looked at the doctor, and in that brief second of eye contact, he saw fear, real fear. And then Gloria stepped forward. She didn't ask. She didn't wait. She reached for Emily. At first the nurse protested, but Kevin nodded. Let her. Gloria sat in the rocking chair, the same one by the window where she always sang. She held the baby tight against her chest, like that first night on the bench. Her voice cracked as she began to hum. Not a lullaby from a children's book, but a hymn, old, southern, barely above a whisper. The same one she used to sing to Ava. Tears slid down her face onto Emily's tiny hands. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. She rocked and sang and prayed without words. Kevin stood across the room, frozen. The machines kept beeping. But something changed. Emily's chest began to rise a little steadier. Her skin flushed with warmth again. Her tiny fingers gripped the edge of Gloria's blouse. The fever began to break. The doctor didn't speak. No one did. There was nothing to say. Because what had saved that child wasn't found in medicine or money. It was in the arms of a woman who had already lost everything once and refused to lose it again. The next evening the dining room was full. Long table, crystal glasses, heavy silverware. Kevin rarely called family dinners, and never with the staff present. But tonight, everyone was there. His sister, his mother, his chief of staff, the housekeeper, the butler, and at the far end, Gloria, still in uniform, still unsure why she was seated among them. She sat with her hands in her lap, shoulders pulled in, as if she might vanish if no one looked directly at her. Kevin stood at the head of the table, silent. For a long time, no one spoke. Then, his voice cut through the air, low, steady. "Last night, my daughter almost died." Fawkes froze, eyes turned. "But she didn't," he continued, "and not because of doctors, or machines, or anything I paid for." He looked at Gloria. She lived because someone loved her enough to hold her through it. The room shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else stared at their plate. Gloria didn't move. "She held Emily," Kevin said. "When I couldn't." He paused. "I was busy, with business, with events, with everything I thought made me important." He looked around the table. "But this woman," his voice cracked slightly, "held the one thing that truly mattered, and she did it not because it was her job, but because she loved her." A gasp. Somewhere near the middle of the table. But Kevin kept going. "She wrapped my child in her arms and risked her own health to keep her warm. She stayed awake for nights. She listened when she cried. She sang to her, prayed over her." And his eyes returned to Gloria. Then he did something none of them expected. He walked to her side and knelt, right there, beside the maid. The marble floor didn't matter. The room full of eyes didn't matter. He looked up at her, voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you. For saving my daughter." A pause. "And for teaching me what it actually means to be a father." Gloria's lips parted, but no words came. Only tears. She shook her head, unsure what to do, how to respond. But Kevin wasn't waiting for approval. He turned back to the table. "She's not just the help," he said firmly. "She's family." The room sat still. No one objected. No one dared. Because in that moment, even the ones who used to whisper finally saw her. The mansion felt different now. Not louder, not busier, just warmer. The silence that once echoed off marble floors was slowly being replaced by humming in the kitchen, by soft baby laughter, by the quiet rhythm of love settling into a place it had never been allowed to live. Kevin started working from home more, not because he had less to do, but because he had something worth staying for. He watched the little moments now, the ones he used to walk past, like the way Emily giggled when Gloria kissed her nose, the way Gloria tucked her into naps with the kind of gentleness that couldn't be taught, the way Emily reached for her in the mornings before she reached for anyone else. One morning Kevin stepped into the nursery, holding something in his hand. Small, gold. Gloria was rocking Emily, whispering the tail end of a lullaby. She looked up as he entered. Not startled, just curious. He walked over and handed her the box. "I don't want this to feel like a gift," he said softly, "because it's not about thanks." Gloria looked down. Inside the box, a delicate gold necklace, a tiny heart hanging at the center. She blinked. I can't accept this," she said, her voice already trembling. "You don't have to," he replied, "but I hope you will." She held the chain in her palm, eyes fixed on the heart. "For the woman," Kevin said, "who kept mine beating." She tried to speak, but her voice caught somewhere between shock and tears. "I don't need anything," she whispered. Kevin smiled gently. "I know. That's why you deserve everything." He helped her clasp it around her neck. Nothing else was said. There didn't need to be. Later that afternoon, Emily took her first wobbly steps across the nursery rug. Gloria clapped quietly, kneeling to catch her. The toddler fell into her arms, laughing, "Mama G!" It was the first time she said it. Clear, unprompted, as if she'd always known the words. Gloria froze. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She just held the child close and let herself breathe. For the first time in years, not like someone passing through, not like help, but like someone who belonged. And behind her, standing in the doorway. Kevin didn't say a word. He just smiled, because for the first time, his house felt like a home. Years passed, the seasons changed outside the gates, but inside the home, something sacred remained. Emily grew quickly, a little taller each spring, a little braver each fall. She scraped knees in the courtyard, painted handprints on hallway walls, learned to tie her shoes in the laundry room where Gloria used to hum lullabies. And Gloria, she stayed, through bedtime stories and school uniforms, through first words, first fevers, first questions about the world. She never asked for more. She just showed up, day after day. Heart open, arms steady. They called her Mama G without needing to explain why. Even the staff followed suit. And Kevin, he no longer walked through the halls with phone in hand. He knew now that the most important things couldn't be scheduled. They had to be witnessed. He sat in the garden more often now, beside the old stone bench, the one he once found too cold to notice. Now, it was sacred. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Emily, now 7, sat beside Gloria on that very bench. Her legs dangled. Her voice carried stories of school and friends and playground drama. Gloria smiled, her hands folded softly in her lap. The golden necklace still rested against her chest, worn now, but never removed. Kevin watched from the balcony, arms crossed gently, eyes a little misty. He knew this chapter of their lives was growing shorter. Gloria had started to slow down. She no longer cleaned, didn't have to. Her presence was no longer tied to duty. It was woven into the walls, into every photo, every corner, every memory that mattered. One morning, Emily was asked at school, "Who raised you?" She didn't hesitate. "My dad," she said, "and my Mama G." Simple. True. Unshaken. That evening, Emily climbed into Gloria's lap with a book she could now read herself, but she still asked Gloria to turn the pages, because some things aren't about need. They're about love and staying close. Outside, the garden lights flickered on, and for a moment, the house, once echoing with emptiness, felt full of stories, of second chances, of hearts that never stopped holding on. Kevin stepped out onto the balcony, looking down at them, and in a voice low, meant for no one but memory, he whispered, "I used to think love was something you earned." He paused. "But the woman who had the least gave us the most." A breath. "And we'll never forget that."